Welcome to this presentation on learning statements, a very important part of your portfolio. First of all, we'll start with the requirements. Each essay will need to have its own learning statement, and each of those learning statements has to reach these requirements. Number one, they need to be 3 paragraphs in length. We'll talk about that in a second. They also have to be a minimum of 1 page. What you're going to do in those learning statements is to reflect on the writing process, and also what has been learned. And again, we'll talk about that in the coming slides. They do need to be typed, obviously, 12-point Times New Roman or 11-point Arial, and then double-spaced. When I talk about learning statements, I'm going to talk about them in terms of sections and kind of my recommendation for each of the sections. Your first section is the introduction. This we'll talk about later. This will need to connect to your theme, and when you watch the presentation on the portfolio introduction, that theme will be explained to you. This introduction for your learning statement will really be very short. It will be maybe 1 to 2 sentences in length, so you can skip this for now. So we'll start then with section 2, and I usually recommend 1 to 2 paragraphs for section 2 as just kind of a quick reflection. You will reflect on the writing process that was used for this paper. So the bullets there will give you some ideas as to what you might be considering in terms of reflection. You could talk about problems or successes in coming up with an idea. That would be some of the pre-writing. You could talk about those problems or successes while drafting, while revising, during the peer revision, or the smart thinking, or the writing center, if you took it there, anything that you've learned, or anything that was maybe a success or maybe not a success. Whatever you talk about, make sure that you are very specific. Refer to specific elements of your essay, perhaps even specific lines. So maybe the research paper, you're having trouble with citations. You might talk specifically about that. The more specific you can be, the better. There is a document that will be attached that will talk about learning statement questions to consider. There's 14 questions on there, and a lot of times what people do is they'll pick 2 questions. They'll develop each one of those questions into a full paragraph, and their paragraph requirement is then satisfied. Really, as long as you're reflecting on the process or on the writing of that essay, you really should be okay in terms of this section, section 2. Section 3 talks about application, and the application is what have you learned and how will you apply it to your writing or to your communication in the future. It doesn't have to be writing, it could be oral communication. In terms of research, it's probably something that you'll continue to do informally for the rest of your lives. And so you could even talk about that. So how will things that we've learned in this class be applicable to you later on in either your future academic work or personal lives? And so what you could do is discuss writing concepts, grammar concepts that were introduced or strengthened during the writing of that particular essay. So let's say, for example, in your comparison contrast essays, maybe you didn't understand that organization was so important in a compare contrast essay. And so maybe that's what you'll be talking about. And you know that you've been asked to do that on tests in terms of essay tests. So in the future going forward, you're going to talk about how now your organization in those essay tests will be better because you've learned about how to organize compare contrast writings. You could talk about grammar concepts as well. So if you didn't know the sentence rules or how to begin and vary sentence beginnings, you could talk about that and how you intend to use that in your future. And again, it could be your work world, it could be academics, it could be your personal life. And then the very last thing is the conclusion paragraph. And this is just 1 or 2 sentences that will lead us from reflection into the paper itself. So your main goal here is to really encourage us to read the essay that follows. In terms of setup, the learning statement will be placed in front of your essay. So what readers will read first is your learning statement, followed by the final draft of your essay. And so it will lead nicely, the reflection will lead nicely into the essay itself. As always, if you have questions or comments or concerns, meet me during one of my virtual office hours. shoot me an email. A phone call would also be sufficient. Thank you.